Welcome to Spotlight on Civil Contracting, the show that delves deeply into the elements of the civil contracting industry throughout New Zealand. With us today we have the CEO of CCNZ, Peter Silcock. So, welcome. Very nice to have you here.
Thanks, Greg.
Firstly, Peter, tell us, what does CCNZ mean? What does it stand for, and what is some of the history behind the organisation?
Well, CCNZ stands for Civil Contractors New Zealand, and it's an organisation that's representing contractors who are building largely civil work, so horizontal infrastructure, things like roads, bridges, but also water infrastructure, and a whole range of things really. But our organisation represents 400 contractors who are working throughout New Zealand, and they range from very large contractors, groups like Downer and Fletcher and Fulton Hogan that people will have heard of, but right down to one-man bands that might have a digger and a trailer or something like that. So it's a very varied organisation.
So with that, with your role as CEO, there's a lot of different foci across those members of your organisation. What does your role entail as CEO?
I'm obviously leading the organisation. We have 8 staff and I report to a board of elected contractors. So civil contractors got a very strong history of advocacy for our members, and our mission, and of course my mission as CEO, is to deliver on that, and that's about having advocating for the industry and ensuring that we have a sustainable industry that can actually build good quality infrastructure for New Zealand.
So in the role as CEO, what pushes your buttons? What about the role really energises you?
Oh, it's such a vital industry, and we've got people working in the industry. They're salt of the earth characters, but they're very professional as well about what they do. They're very proud of the work they do. And the work is really important for New Zealanders, and it's not just for one person. So we're not building a house for one person. We're building a road that whole communities will use, the whole country will use, or we're building water systems, flood protection that protects whole communities. So it's an important industry. It's one that employs a lot of people. It's one that generates a lot of economic activity in New Zealand. But in that we've got these just down-to-earth people, and they want to do a good job, and so they're a real pleasure to represent.
One of the things about the contracting industry as a whole is it's one of those industries where once you do your job, you cover it all up, and we, as the public, we don't get to see that. What do you feel the general public perception is of contractors in general?
Oh, look, the question that my friends ask me mostly is, when is the pothole at the end of the road going to be fixed? But the reality is that our members work for clients, so the contractors have jobs that are tendered and procured by the likes of the Transport Agency or the local council or local water authority, Watercare, for instance, or Wellington Water. So those relationships are really important, but you're absolutely right, particularly with water infrastructure. We bury a lot of the great work that we do, and unless there's a really major problem, generally people don't see it. Not like roads, where people do notice one little pothole if it's outside their property or along the road they drive along regularly. So there's some fantastic jobs that our members are involved in, some very high profile work like a Waterview Tunnel, or historically things like Auckland Harbour Bridge or the Clyde Dam. But on a day-to-day basis, a lot of our members are doing small amounts of work. They might be working on a subdivision, doing the contouring on a subdivision, or putting retaining walls in. And it's important work still, and a lot of smaller contracts, small, medium businesses working in that space.
So what's the overall split? Obviously, as you mentioned, there's a large amount of companies who the public will be very aware of, such as Downer in New Zealand or Fulton Hogan, McConnell Down and the like. But what is the overall split in terms of the member makeup with the size of the company?
Around about, with our 400 members, we have about 50% of those members would have a turnover of less than $5 million. Of course, if you look at the whole industry, who's doing the work, there's probably it's maybe not 80-20, it might be, but it would probably be close to that, maybe 70-30. So 30% of the contractors are doing 70% of the work, and a number of those large contractors are employing, they employ thousands of people, but they also employ small contractors. So there are relationships, so subcontract agreements. So we might have a large construction company building a new state highway, who contract another company, smaller company, to do their earthworks or to do some drainage related to the road. So relationships between our members are quite important as well. And it's true to say that large contractors do rely on subcontractors to support the work they're doing, and it's a very important part of their own businesses, is having relationships with reliable, quality subcontractors who are going to do components of the work for them.
Bearing in mind that a large number of members are also in competition with each other for similar jobs or the same jobs in the same regions, how is the level of camaraderie within the organisation?
There is very strong competition, but at the same time camaraderie, and I would liken that a little bit to the sports field, where people compete intensely on the sports field, but we'll get together afterwards and have a social function or have discussions. And we see that even with our national sports teams, where they'll be chatting afterwards to their opposition player. There's a lot of camaraderie, and I think that Civil Contractors New Zealand is based on the fact that we're all part of the same industry, and therefore there are things like standards, there are things like relationships with clients, and some of the processes that all contractors are dealing with. The recruitment of young people into the industry, and the upskilling, technical specifications, those sorts of things are all things that CCNZ gets involved in. But our members are of course competing as well. So we need to manage that, and largely when our members are elected to come around our board table, of course, they leave their hat at the door, their company hat at the door, and need to be acting in the best interests of the whole industry, and that's what CCNZ is all about.
CCNZ, being the overarching body, has a number of responsibilities. Can you tell us a little bit about those areas of responsibility, things such as safety within the industry, which of course is a major concern for construction and for civil contracting, things such as training, the continual growth of the workforce?
Yeah, look, they're some of the things. We get involved in a whole myriad of activities as an representative or industry organisation. We're very much driven by our members who say, this is an issue for us today. We want you to do some work on that. Safety is very important for construction industry. Historically hasn't had a great record. I think the civil area is a little bit better than some of our vertical partners, but we're working together with the whole construction industry to see where we can improve health and safety. Safety is always a very important aspect. We do some dangerous work, and those risks need to be controlled.
So Peter, we've talked about some of the elements of the awards and some of the great projects that we've seen across the contracting industry. But of course there is a downside. There's another darker side of the industry that we try and avoid like the plague, which of course is those projects that don't go to the prescribed outcome, those ones that potentially leave contractors financially out of pocket and they're overrun on time. Can you tell us a little bit about how the industry manages that and how CCNZ can be involved?
Yeah, sure. And look, our contracting industry is very much, there are risks and there are awards, and the other side of that, of course, there are penalties as well. And I think if things go really wrong, that can be fatal for a company. And we've seen that in some of the vertical industry where recently, where it's come back to bite people in a very big way. So, that's it's certainly part of the industry. What we're encouraging our people to do is understand the risks. They need to have good capability about estimating and the prices that they put in. So the prices they bid into a project, they get held to that. And it's not a matter of, thumb in the air going, what am I going to bid for this project? They need to do a careful analysis of what the costs are, what overruns there might be. And for instance, I was talking to someone recently who said, that we always price in, some additional materials over and above, but a big part of what we're facing now is waste management. So what is the cost of taking waste away? And do we factor that in? But look, I think when projects overrun time, for instance, there are penalties in a lot of contracts that are imposed, and people need to manage that. And so how are we helping? Civil Contractors New Zealand are helping the industries manage that. We have a very strong relationship with Kensington Swan, our legal advisors. We make them available for a short period of advice to our individual members in terms of our relationship. So we want them to get good legal advice. We want them to understand the contracts that they're entering into, because if they don't, it can be absolutely fatal for their companies, and particularly with smaller companies. That people have invested their whole lives in that. It's not just a job. It's the people are investing a lot of time in it, and passion, and family businesses. So often it's not just one person. There might be 3 or 4 people working in the industry, or whole families who are working in the business. So if the business goes down the drain, of course, everyone's jobs go down the drain as well. So, it becomes very personal, but, we need to be professional, and, that's the advantage of working with professional contractors, because when jobs go wrong like that in a big way, it's obviously bad for contractors and their employers, but it's also bad for the client who sees delays and having to re-tender it, get someone else come in who might often say, well, that's the other guy's fault, not ours, sort of thing. So it's never an easy situation for clients to manage either.
Is this a situation where clients can help the process by perhaps not going on a lowest tender wins?
Oh, look, we would say that often the lowest price is not the best price. And when I say that, it's about what is value for money. And look, comment I make is it's like buying a car. You can buy a Lexus, or you can buy a little Toyota. You're not buying the same thing. There's a big difference in money, and we don't always want to buy a Lexus, but we don't always want to buy a Starlet either. So we might want to have something in the middle. And it's interesting, there are some countries where their government policy is that the lowest tender is always discarded. And that discourages people from lowballing tenders to effectively provide, to get the job. But then, of course, it's about the delivery. And often you'll find if people have gone in for the very low price, then there'll be more claims that come through. So these are extra costs that the contractor will try and claim off the client. And some of those will be legitimate, but some of those they might push the boundaries on as well because they haven't built enough price in. So, there are consequences around that. So we would like to see a few of our members have to take responsibility around that, about how they're managing their risk and what prices they're putting in, and what conditions there are around the contracts. We would like to see a lot more clients using more standard contracts rather than having a whole lot of special conditions that are hard for people to understand. If we can use standard contracts, that makes it easier for people to manage and understand the risk.
We started on the ground on the Waikato Expressway in October 2015. So we're currently 2.5 years into it and 1.5 years to go. I'm feeling pretty comfortable we're on track to complete within that time frame.
After completing 2 summer construction seasons, we're roughly halfway through this project. This summer, we moved more than 2 million cubic metres of sand and soil. Now that the expressway embankments are out of the ground, we can continue our earthworks through winter when the weather allows.
So if we're looking at the overall playing field in terms of how much work is out there, where do we stand at the moment?
Well, the industry is very busy at the moment, and keeping in mind that we're coming off the back of a large program of new state highway construction, which was led by the previous national government. So we've still got some of that work going on, and examples of that, of course, things like Puhoi to Warkworth, the Huntly Bypass and Waikato Expressway, Transmission Gully, those sorts of projects which are still going on. We're now heading into a phase where there's been a major change of focus with the new Labor-led government, and more focus on safety improvements, more focus on local roads, and so we're not going to see a lot of big new state highways, apart from, of course, Manawatu Gorge replacement is probably the only large new job on offer. But the amount of work, value of work is going to be the same. It's just a very different nature of that work, smaller projects. As I say, safety improvements are a really big part of that, and that's largely been driven, of course, because of with our really shocking statistics around deaths on roads, and road design and construction is a factor in that. There are other factors, of course, as well. So that's where we are with the transport and roading space, and of course we've got these really quite big public transport, so light rail from Auckland Central to out towards the airport in Manukau, also bus lanes and investment in rail, which is going on with this government as well. So the industry is changing focus a little bit. It's following, as we always do. We will do the work that clients want us to do. So clients call the tune, not contractors, about what gets built and what gets maintained. So we see a bit more maintenance work coming along in that space as well. The other big part of our work is in the 3 waters, so that's the wastewater, fresh water and stormwater. And more work is coming in that area as well, so that's largely driven by local authorities and their investments. Some feedback coming out of that, of course, the Havelock North inquiry, which is driving the need to improve our infrastructure around fresh water. Impacts around climate change with sea level rise, more intense and frequent storms, so how we manage the rivers and build stop banks, those sorts of things. A lot more work coming in that space for our members.
Which certainly gives a very rosy future for the civil contracting industry for New Zealand. How important is that in terms of this organisation and being able to have that really strong relationship with government? Oh,
look, I think it's a critical element of what we do, probably one of the most important issues that we handle is that advocacy and representation of industry. And that's why, looking back in the history of our organisation, which was only formed in 2014, but the predecessor organisations were Contractors Federation and Roading New Zealand, and they've been in existence since 1944, when contractors felt that they should be represented. So historically, actually one of the main emphasis for forming Contractors Federation in the first place was that government was self-performing a lot of this work through the Ministry of Works. And our members felt that they could do a better job and they could deliver better value through a contracting model. So, over time, way back when the Contractors Federation started, only about 25 to 30% of the work was actually tendered out to private contractors. Whereas now, of course, NZTA don't self-perform work; they tender out all their work to the open market. So, that's a huge change, and we think that the country and benefits from that, both in terms of value for money and in terms of the quality of the outputs. That representation is critical, and so we're representing the industry around health and safety and improving the way that jobs are procured. So that's effectively the relationship between the client, the likes of NZTA or a local council, and our members, and trying to make that more efficient, trying to ensure that we get the outcomes that the client wants. And so that's about having the right specifications. It's also about having positive relationships, because our best projects are always delivered when the client and the contractor are working together as one, and including in that the engineer to the job too, so that we often have a consulting engineer involved as well, of course, who's responsible for that design. So when those groups come together, we get great outcomes and great infrastructure which benefits the public.
Just one final question in terms of partnerships, I suppose. These are projects, both large and medium and small, that have large amounts of organisations, which means large amounts of people, all coming together for one specific thing and then disbanding. The challenge that lies here is how can you harness that power in those partnerships and maintain that level of opportunity for growth?
We're seeing an increasing incidence of that, and when I say rewarding, it's not giving them an award saying this is a great project, which is a good accolade for people to have, but where the client says, we'll give you some preference around the next job. And look, we had a really good example of that recently with some big jobs where the Aris Tunnel in Wellington, by the old museum there, we had two of our larger companies who came together in an alliance to build that. They performed very well, and NZTA approached them around improvements to the wharf in the Chatham Islands, and so they got together to do another big job using that same model. So, look, that's great. I think there needs to be, that recognition, and more clients are going towards what we call panels, where they have a process that they might run every 5 years, where they go, okay, who's going to do the work for us, and select a number of contractors. So there might be half a dozen or so who they say, these people are going to do the work for us over the next 5 years, and that might be based on capability, but hopefully it's based on things like the performance, the quality of their work, the safety and reliability that those people have provided in the past. And that's good for us, because as an industry we need to give our people continuity of work. If we don't give them continuity, then they'll go, they may leave New Zealand. There's a lot of infrastructure work going on in Australia, on the East Coast at the moment, which we don't want to advertise too much, of course, but that can be quite attractive to some of the people working in our industry, and we want to retain them here on great projects.
And a caveat is I've worked with the civil contractors of New Zealand for the last 10 years, actually greater than 10 years, and I have a great love of the awards process, and standing on stage I kind of live vicariously through that process. It's quite a lovely thing. But I'm always impressed with the level of excellence that we are seeing and the continual growth within there.
Yep.
Peter, thank you very much indeed. This is the opening segment of Spotlight on Civil Contracting. It's been an absolute pleasure having you here in the studio with me. Thank you very much indeed for taking the time to be here. Next week, we will be delving into the CCNZ Hire Pool Awards of Excellence, which were held for the civil contracting industry in August of 2018. We'll be highlighting some of the great work and the great projects that have been done by the civil contracting industry here in New Zealand. Thanks for watching.